Hey everyone, welcome back to bageltcg. Today we're going to be continuing our deck tech series for Tales of Aria Heroes, this time going with one of my favorite classes, Guardian, with an Oldhim CC Control deck tech. This list is going to be very similar to the list that won the Calling in Orlando, Florida, where I went. It was a great event, and I was really inspired by that deck. I thought it looked great, so this has a few tweaks. Some of it's for personal meta, some of it's for stuff I just think is fun and goes more towards my play style, but I think the core of the deck itself is quite strong, so as long as you follow most of the cards that are in this deck, you should have pretty solid success. We're going to start, as always, with the equipment. We've got the weapon, Winter's Wail. It's a very powerful weapon in the fact that it hits for a breakpoint number at 4. It also has a powerful on-hit if you have pitched an ice card for it, making a frostbite if it hits the opponent. This is very good as an anti-aggro weapon. Aggro decks don't like to block typically, so if you can block with 3 cards from your hand, keep a blue ice card, and then pitch it to swing with Winter's Wail, they either have to block it, which is good for you because they're using up their cards, or they don't block it and they get a frostbite. Either way, it's pretty much a win-win. So Winter's Wail is just awful for any aggro deck. And one of the reasons that Oldhim is so strong right now is because aggro decks are quite powerful. We have ANTI-BRIAR. A lot of these decks trying to not spend any resources, or at least as few resources as possible, are hurt pretty significantly by getting even just 1 or 2 frostbite tokens. So consistent Winter Wail swings are a good way to victory for Oldhim here. I will say, just as a tip, if you're playing against a deck that runs Scar for Scar, like for example, the Briar decks pretty much all run red Scar for Scar, I would not hit your opponent if it makes them go lower life than you are, right? Because then you'll turn on their Scar for Scars and give them go again, which is just not good. So I would wait until your Winter's Wail doesn't knock them lower than you are, and then start swinging with the Winter's Wail to make it so that their Scar for Scars are not turned on. Next up, we have Cratersfist. This one's pretty simple. It blocks for 2, and then it blocks for 1. You're never going to use the effect. That's it. It's just a 2 block and then a 1 block. Another kind of Arcanite Skull Cap, basically. Crown of Seeds is kind of the star of this deck. I think it's actually the strongest thing in the entire Oldhim deck. For the cost of 1 resource, you put a card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck and draw a card. This helps with pitch stacking, and it helps with like card sorting. It fixes bad hands. It blocks arcane damage. It just does so many powerful things for only the cost of a resource. 1 health is already worth about 1 resource. So you already saved that life there, and then the arsenal is just the gravy on top, right? So for example, this deck is trying to stack Oakenolds into your deck with either a Pulse or an Ice or an Earth card together, and so this Crown of Seeds really helps that. If you draw a hand that has a bunch of things to block with within an Oakenold, you arsenal that Oakenold and you can send it back to the bottom with Crown of Seeds and then draw into something that's better to block with, right? It's just a very versatile card. If you don't know how to pitch stack well or to stack your deck well to get threats together, Oldhim is a great place to practice that because Crown of Seeds helps you out with it, and because Oakenold really needs you to stack in that way to be able to draw Oakenold with the fuse cards. Oldhim is just a great place to start learning how to stack deck well, and then you can move on to Bravo, for example, who doesn't have the crutch of Crown of Seeds, and it's a bit more difficult. So a great place to start learning how to stack the deck. Heart of Ice, I think, is only for Kano. You don't really need it. If you just want to run Null Rune Robe instead, that's fine. I think I'm running Null Rune Robe right now because my Heart of Ice is still in the mail. It doesn't come in that often. You barely ever play a Kano. There's just really not a lot of downside to running it. You don't have to even run it here. You could just run a 3rd Enlightened Strike. But really, you're already running these 2 Null Rune for the Null Rune Boots and the Null Rune Gloves. You're already running those for all the Rosetta Thorns out there. There's not a ton of downside for throwing in an extra slot for Heart of Ice, and then just making sure you would never lose to Kano, basically. We're running the Mage Master Boots. These are for anyone that's not doing arcane damage, and lets you do the combo that Guardians have always done with Toma Fyendal to gain 5 life and draw 2 cards and do stuff like that. It's a powerful turn for Guardians Mage Master boots are kind of a Guardian staple right now. I wouldn't go without them. Some people prefer Ironhide, I think, in Oldhim, but I just think the Tome of Fyendel tech is pretty powerful. After that, we've got the 2 types of Null Rune. I think 2 Null Rune's pretty necessary right now with Rosetta Thorn. It's pretty easy for us to block it as well. We can pitch a blue, use our shield to block 1, and then we'll have 2 floating still that can block that arcane damage from Rosetta Thorn later. I would pretty much always bring in double Null Rune, I think, against all 3 Rune Blades right now, because I believe all 3 Rune Blades are on Rosetta Thorn. And I don't think I would bring in double Null Rune against anyone else other than Kano. So pretty much double Null Rune against anyone that runs Rosetta Thorn, yeah. Then we have the shield, very powerful equipment here. It's very good against anyone that breaks the chain often, which is pretty much just Runeblade, but Runeblade is probably the most popular class right now, so I think that's why Oldhim is so well positioned. He blocks very effectively against the most popular deck. Yeah, he's just has good game against all the Runeblades, I'd say. Maybe Viscerize is the worst because they can stack Rune Chants, but I think he's got a good shot against all of them. And Rampart's part of that, along with, obviously, Crown of Seeds and Winter's Wail. Next, we have Tectonic Plating. This deck doesn't make surges as much as Bravo does. Most of our cards, we don't need to have a surge to play. There's a few that we do, but really, we don't need the surges that much. This is mostly just another 3 block. If you've got an extra card and you want to put it back on the bottom of your deck, kind of similar to Crown of Seeds, you can filter. You can like pitch threats back to the bottom, pitch your Oakenold to the bottom with the tech plating. You can make a surge for that, but the only cards that you would really want a surge for are these Endless Winters, these Spinal Crushes, and these Righteous Cleansings. So not a ton of them. But mostly, Tectonic Plating is just it's a 3 block similar to Cratersfist, which is pretty helpful. We're going to move on to the cards now. We've got the 3 Command and Conquer, just a really solid card. It's a good threat into like Briars who like to Arsenal a lot, and it's actually pretty solid. And actually, I don't know if Command and Conquer is bad against anyone really. It just always is threatening. Everyone wants to use their Arsenal. Using your Arsenal well is how you win Flesh and Blood a lot of the time, and Command and Conquer just threatens that. It's why the card's the most expensive Majestic in the game by like a mile. It's a very powerful card, especially in decks that can utilize Red Pummel well. They can't use defense reactions, so you can just play your Red Pummel. They can't stop it, and they just get destroyed, right? If they don't block enough, if they don't block the full 10 with just during the defense phase, they take the 10. They have to discard a card. They lose their arsenal. If you're playing against a deck that uses a lot of defense reactions, like Dash, for example, I would actually recommend trying to pitch stack your Command and Conquerors and Red Pummels together and try to get all 3 of them as a pair. So that will really just knock out like unmovables from Arsenal. It'll either force them to super overblock it, which you're happy with, or it'll force them to lose a bunch of a tempo. So I would recommend trying to stack those together. Endless Winter is a great anti-aggro card. It's just a great card in general. It's a 4 for 8, which is a good rate. And if it hits them, you don't even really need to fuse this card. Like, you can fuse it if you happen to have the extra cards in hand, but I wouldn't worry too desperately about fusing Endless Winter. The most powerful thing is the on hit, where if it hits the opponent, whenever they activate an ability on their next turn, they get a Frostbite. Abilities are basically anything that's not on like a card, like not playing a card. So abilities are like swinging with your weapon. So for example, like we can see here, this is an ability on Crown of Seeds, the once per turn instant. Tectonic Plating, the once per turn action of making a Seismic Surge, is an ability. The once per turn action of attacking with your Winter's Wail is an ability. So those are all abilities, but someone playing a card is not an ability. Anyways, that's pretty powerful because people like swinging with their weapon, and a lot of heroes use their equipment pretty often as well. The main thing is, like, I can think of, obviously Dash wants to activate a lot of items, and all of those are abilities. So Dash just can't really activate their items much on that turn. Anyways, Endless Winter is a great card. Don't worry about fusing it too much. Just get in there for some damage. Next up, we have Enlightened Strike. I'm running 2 Enlightened Strike right now. These are basically against decks that we have to race. So for example, the main 2 I can think of is Prism and Dash, who can just kill us if we don't race them to death. They just set up too much with either auras or items. So you can't go control against either of those decks. You have to just try to kill them as fast as possible. And Soil and Lightning Strike is pretty much always going to be a like 5. It's a 0 for 5 with Go Again, almost always for our deck. So what you're going to do is you're going to 0 for 5 with Go Again, and then use another card to swing with your weapon or swing with another attack. It just gets you extra damage in. It also lets you attack twice on a turn when a Prism auras, for example. So you can attack with Enlightened Strike with Go Again to hit them for 5, and then you can swing your weapon at the aura to pop it, and it lets you not lose your tempo completely. This is another card I would maybe recommend arsenaling against Prism or Dash, and just saving it for when you need to get that extra pressure in. The Fate for Scenes and the Sink Belows are kind of the standard, like red D reacts that we're always going to have in almost all control decks. They're just 0 for 4s. They're very powerful. I can't really see a control deck running without these D reacts. I went over Red Pummel already, so we're just going to talk about Oakenold. I think that's the namesake of this deck that the Nationals player gave it. I think his name is Michael Hamilton, so shout out to him for this awesome deck. But I believe he called it like Oakenold Control or something like that. It's just a very powerful card if you can pitch stack it properly and set it up to deal a lot of damage. It's a 3. Okay, let's assume you fuse it, right? Because you only pretty much play this card if you're fusing it. I mean, you can obviously play it without fusing it, but it's so much stronger if you fuse it. If you're fusing it, it's a 3 resources for 9 dominate. If it hits, they put 2 cards from their hand that are at random on the bottom of their deck in any order, right? So just very powerful. 3 for 9 dominate is a pretty absurd rate. Stripping 2 cards is really strong. Oakenold is just a great card. It puts on a lot of pressure. And the main thing is the cards you're fusing with aren't being pitched, right? So it's not like you're paying 9 resources. Those 2 cards, or 1 card with Pulse, are staying in your hand. This allows you to just not fatigue as much, which is really powerful. We have these staunch responses. I'm going to just say this here, right? So I am running 1 Heart of Fyendal down here. And 2 red staunch responses. That's kind of like a package for anti-aggro that you definitely don't need to run. Heart of Fyendal is obviously a very expensive card. If you don't want to purchase a Heart of Fyendal, or you don't own one, I would cut this Heart of Fyendal and cut these 2 red staunch responses and just put in 3 Sigil of Solace. Like it's pretty much just as powerful. I just like running Heart of Fyendal because it's really fun to play Fabled cards. But you can see this deck is missing the classic 3 red Sigil of Solace. Just cut the 2 red Staunch Response and the Heart of Fyendal and put those in there. They're just as powerful. I just like I said, it's just fun to play with Fabled cards. Obviously, I pretty much never get an excuse to, so I just wanted to play with it. You do want to run these 3 blue Staunch Responses though. The nice thing about Staunch Response is it's only a 2-cost defense reaction, which works really well with our Rampart of the Ram's Head. What that allows us to do is pitch a blue, block for 1 with the Rampart, and then with the other 2 floating, use a Staunch. So if we're using the blue one, that's still 1 blue blocking for 6, which is pretty powerful. 2 cards typically block for 6 anyways, but this puts 1 back in the deck instead, which is an advantage there. I believe our only Earth cards that are just Earth are these 6 Autumn's Touch. These are obviously in here for the most part to fuse with Oakenold. You're going to try to stack one of them with Oakenold if we can't find the Pulse of Eisenloft. But outside of that, they're solid swings on their own. It's like a blue. It's a 3-cost blue that is a 3 for 5. They all block for 3, which is nice. The yellow is a 3 for 6, which is a fine rate if you're getting into the late game, but usually they're either blocking or pitching early, and then also trying, to fuse with your Oakenold. Spinal Crush is a very powerful anti-aggro card, just a powerful card in general. We don't have a lot of ways to give it Dominate here, but that's pretty much fine because it's still a 5 for 9, and you can still, aggro decks are still going to try to block it with at least 6 block so they don't get crushed. So you're still stripping cards from their hand and pushing in damage. It's pretty much never a bad card unless you're swinging it into like a prism that's setting up auras for free after or something. But Spinal Crush is just a really solid card. 1 second. Excuse me. The 2 Remembrance here. This is for decks that are trying to fatigue you out of threats. So these are also for the dash, basically for the mirror. So against either Guardian, for Warrior, specifically Dorinthia. Dorinthia likes to go late. So not Bolton, but against Dorinthia, and then against Prism and Dash. These remembrances are going to hit, hopefully, Oakenolds, and just let you do a bunch of Oakenolds. They can also hit Command and Conquers if you have used the Command and Conquer without a pummel, because like I said, you want to try to pair them all together. So that's mostly what these remembrances are for. You could hypothetically play 9 Oakenolds in a game. If you play all 3 Oakenolds, remembrance them back, play them again, and then remembrance them back. It's just really powerful. Those decks try to run, like, for example, the Dash decks run like 6 unmovables, which make it really hard for your Oakenolds to get through. So these remembrances will hopefully give you more threats than they have defense reactions. Righteous Cleansing is another tech for the Briar decks. A lot of Briar decks right now are trying to beat Guardian by either playing red Evergreens or by stacking Sting of Sorceries with Ball Lightning, which is I think like 18 damage, 18 arcane damage turn. It's a really big arcane damage turn. And this is just our most effective way to block it. The first one does 2, 4. Yeah, I think it's like it does a lot of arcane damage with the Ball Lightning. So Righteous Cleansing you can pitch early, and then late game when you've gotten to your second cycle of your deck, you can throw it against an aggro deck, and if they don't block it, if they let it crush them, you can get rid of their pitch stacking. So if they're stacking some Ball Lightnings, or if they're stacking some Evergreens, or if they're stacking any other thing, if you're against another Guardian and they're stacking like they're crippling and 3 blues, they either have to block it or just lose that threat that they have stacked against you. So Righteous Cleansing is a good late game card. You pitch it early and then you get it back late game to threaten whatever they've stacked. It's also just a lot of damage. 10 damage is a lot. Tome of Fyendal is for the Mage Master boots. If you take out Mage Master boots, like against any of the Null Rune decks that you need Null Rune against, so any of the Rune Blades, you take out Tome as well. It doesn't really do anything there. And then we're going to run through the blues pretty quickly. 3 Blizzard. We're running exactly 15 ice cards, I believe, which is 1/4 of your deck if you're keeping at 60, which means hopefully 1 out of every 4 of your cards in every hand will be a blue ice card, which will let you pitch it to Winter's Wail. So do not take out any of your blue ice cards when you're sideboarding, including Pulse. So I believe there is 15, and you don't want to go under that 15. So we're already towing the line a little. The Earth doesn't matter as much because the Earth is only diffused with Oakenold, but the ice you need for Winter's Wail. So keep all of these ice cards in. You could even add a 3rd blue Winter's Bite if you feel like you don't see your ice enough to try to get to 16 ice cards. So that's pretty much what all these ice cards are for. Most of them are just to pitch. That's all I would worry about. They're pitching for Winter's Wail. Channel Lake Frigid you can play out. Obviously make sure you could only play it when you have an ice card that you pitch for it. Otherwise it'll just disappear. But Channel Lake Frigid is obviously a very, very powerful card against pretty much every deck in the game. But like I said, you want to play it. If you only can keep it in play. Obviously, there's most decks it's good against. Like Dash, it's good against any aggro deck. It's good against. I think the only deck I can think of it's not good against is maybe a Guardian who's already overpaying for everything. Glacial Footsteps is just similar to Cranial Crush and Disable. They're really high attack, which lets you reveal them easier for these 3 Rouse the Ancients. And also, you can pitch them early, and then late game you have big threats. And that's one of the advantages here. Early, you're like, oh, I'm just going to pitch for 3, blah, blah, blah. Late game, you're like, oh, my 3 pitch actually swings for 8 now. So don't worry about these early. You're just pitching them or blocking with them. Late game, they're big threats that you cycle back into. I think the only card I haven't talked about are these 3 Terror Sunders and these 3 Rouse the Ancients. Terror Sunder is less good in this deck, obviously, because we don't have Anathos, and with Winter's Wail, it'll only make it 5. So hopefully you can maybe Terror Sunder another type of attack here, like a Disable or something. If you can even do enough resources for that, I don't think you can. But, if you're Terror Sundering your weapon, it's still fine. Make sure they don't have enough equipment to block it out, right? If you're just going to Terror Sunder plus Winter's Wail for 5, if they have any equipment that blocks for 2, it's pretty much pointless. So you pitch these Terror Sunders early. When they're out of equipment, you can Terror Sunder into your hammer, and they might not actually have enough equipment to block it, and they would have to have a D-react then. So I would only Terror Sunder your weapon if you know they can't equipment block it. The Rouse the Ancients are for decks you're racing. It's probably the strongest tech that Guardian has right now to race decks. It's just a 7 go again, which is really powerful. It's one of the main reasons we run these really high attack blues to reveal Tarousey Ancients. It's just so strong to swing for 7 go again for only 3. And then usually you'll follow it up with a powerful attacker with a weapon swing. Yeah, and it's great. So we're going to look at sideboard here. I have it sideboarded right now with the main board for aggro, like specifically thinking about Runeblade here. And then the sideboard is for the decks we need to race. So you can see the cards that we don't have in right now are these 2 Enlightened Strike I talked about. We also don't have these pummels. They are only 2 blocks, so against most aggro decks, I'm not going to have them in as much. If you want to keep them in, it's fine, but they're better against decks that have defense reactions. You can play in them in combination with your Command and Conquers. These 2 Remembrances, they don't block at all. It's not great. So you're playing them against decks you're racing as well, where you don't care about blocking. This Toma Fiendal, like I said, this is coming in when you're running Mage Master boots, which against Runeblade you're not going to. And then these 3 Rousey Ancients, also 2 blocks only. So these are for against decks you are racing. So that's what's going out right now. This would be the main board against like aggro decks and Runeblade decks. Some aggro decks aren't arcane decks. So if you're playing against a deck that's like aggro Katsu, and they're not going to be on like the game plan of doing arcane damage, you can just throw in this Toma Fiendal and go into 61 cards. That'll be fine. It's not going to change anything too much. But yeah, that's pretty much the deck. It runs really smooth. I'm going to be playing it tonight at my local armory. Hopefully it goes well. Like always, I will have a link to this deck that's going to stay static, and I will also have a link to the deck that I'm currently tweaking, because I always update my decks, and it'll have the date in the title for when I last updated it. If it's an old one, it's probably because I haven't played that deck in a long time. But I'm going to be playing this deck for a while because I love Guardian. So I will have a link to this in the comments, or in the description, I should say. I will also have a link to my current one. Let me know what you guys want to see. The last hero we have to talk about from Tales of Aria is Lexi. Ice Lexi is pretty good right now, so we'll probably do an Ice Lexi deck tech in a few days. I'm also going to do a bit of a draft primer because I have a draft skirmish I'm going to, trying to practice for that, so I'd love to share some of my tips. And that's pretty much what I have in the pipeline right now. If you guys have anything you're interested in seeing, let me know in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to, and I appreciate you all watching. See you next time.